And I think it's really interesting that even I, growing up, thought the desert was an empty space. The idea that it's some sort of wasteland. All those cliches people think are based on observation, but you have to spend time there to realize how alive it is.
Welcome to the Desert Lady Diaries podcast, conversations with women who have found their home in the Mojave Desert. I'm Dawn Davis, and this is episode 156. Find out more about the podcast at desertladydiaries.com and engage with the guests, with other listeners, or me on Facebook and Instagram at Desert Lady Diaries. If you're listening to this podcast in real time and would like to support a good cause, mark your calendar for July 14th at 7 p.m. La Matadora Gallery in downtown Joshua Tree will be hosting a fundraiser for the Institute of Inquiry. The Institute's mission is to cultivate a lifelong love of learning in their students and facilitate a deeper understanding of the high desert through inquiry and place-based education. The fundraiser is open to the public. Student artwork will be on display, and there will be a silent auction of items from local artists and businesses. Drinks and snacks will be served, and local musicians will supply the soundtrack for the event. If you can't make it on July 14th, the art and the auction items will still be on display and available for bid until July 19th. For more information about the Institute, visit their website, instituteofinquiry.org. La Matadora Gallery is located at 61857 Highway 62, next door to the Beauty Bubble. Kate McCabe has called the high desert home since 2005 when she founded Kidnap Yourself. She teaches film at UC San Diego as well as CalArts, where she earned her MFA in experimental animation. Her Mojave Weather Diaries have produced 4 books, and her current work includes painting, photography, and diaries, incorporating communication themes and humorous observations of the world. Most renowned for Sabia, her feature film for low desert legend Brant Bjork, her films have screened globally and most recently at the Palm Springs Art Museum. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You are welcome. So even before I ask you the usual, what brought you to the desert, although this may dovetail right into that, I actually didn't know Brant Bjork. So I had to look him up. So for someone who's listening, and let's save them the trouble, can you just high level who Brant is?
Well, there's a very special music scene in the desert that began in the 80s, and they were just punk kids putting on generator shows and making music in their garages, just like everywhere else. But somehow a special group here turned into many groups. Yawning Man, Caius, Brant Bjork was part of Caius. They were opening up for Metallica when they were like 17 in Australia. The low desert got put on the map by this small music scene, and Brant comes out of that. And I connected with him through my filmmaking, asking for his music for one of my films because I wanted a California sound, and that's how I came to the desert.
Right. So let's go a little deeper on that.
Music brought me to the desert. That music specifically, yeah.
And was that your very first experience with desert?
Besides the movies and just driving through really fast to get cross country, yeah, the desert was a abstract idea, 100%. And I feel like when I had heard about it, it was a place where people wanted to go party, and I was kind of like, okay, whatever, you know. But Brant, when he saw the film that I did finish, it was a short film I made called Milk and Honey that I used his music for. He was kind of blown away because I guess I finished the thing I said I would do, which is a regular habit, I know, terrible. And he'd never seen a film like that before, utilizing time lapse. And that I've been shooting time lapse for like 20 years, but it's kind of personal. It's not just like landscapes. And he just was like, I want you to make a visual album for me. Will you come to the desert? And I was actually looking to buy a house back then in Philadelphia, where I was born. And I came here and just never left, basically.
I think I read something. I read something today that you were here, like it was 3 months. Were you here for 3 months filming, or was it 3 months from when you had left here that you said, I need to be there permanently?
Well, the music brought me here. We got snowed in that weekend in November. It was like November 20th, 2004, and we were trapped. And I'd never seen snow in the desert. I didn't even know it could snow in the desert. And I was just blown away. And the fact that it had real seasons and these were real people making food and having a dance party. All that stuff was beautiful. And it was like, this is how I want to live wherever I am, of course. But it was the Milky Way. I should really say that the music brought me here, but the Milky Way is what kept me here, because I had a truly Carl Sagan moment. I grew up on the East Coast going down the shore and going in the mountains, and maybe I just didn't know to look up, or what, maybe whatever was missing from my perspective then shifted here when I was in the stars like that. And it's really sweet and simple. I just felt like I was home. Like it, yeah, music, yay. But Carl Sagan, wow, that was it. That was why I stayed. And yeah, I bought this little cabin and within like 3 months. And I've been here ever since. So it's like 16 and a half years. Yeah, at Kidnap Yourself headquarters, I call it.
So talk to me, let's roll back even a little further then. So you were in LA when Grant reached out to you. So how did you make the move from the East Coast to the West Coast?
Well, I was looking at only one grad school for animation, and that was at CalArts, where this man named Jules Engel had started experimental animation, and he broke off from Disney. He was like the wizard behind all the beautiful things in Fantasia and even backdrops for Mr. Magoo, and every amazing animation teacher I had studied with him and their students. He's the source of what made CalArts really special. And when my mom passed away, I felt free to leave the East Coast. I was like, okay, let's see if I can get into the school. So luckily I got in because I didn't have another plan. I'd probably be bartending in Philly still, or, but I don't know, who knows. So I moved to California for a specific reason, to work with this beautiful artist. And I'm so lucky that I got there while he was still alive, because he also was kind of a magical creature that was old since the beginning of time. Oh. He just seemed, he was ageless. I mean, at least when I got there, he was ageless. So that's how I came to California. And I was teaching at CalArts when I made Milk and Honey, the film that I had asked Grant to contribute music to. But, I get why he didn't believe me, because people talk a lot in bars and the scene. So he never expected my film to show up finished. But I'm proof that showing up kind of counts, like when you show up, good things happen. Being snowed in and seeing the stars, and a lot of it was also based on the concept of having a home where I could travel from the world and be able to save money and cut down on expenses. You can actually afford full coverage on a car out in the desert versus Philadelphia or Los Angeles,
Right. No collision.
Little practical things. I'm also kind of practical. And there also grows my desire for space. I grew up actually in, I don't know if it was really close quarters, but with a lot of violence and bullies and things, and just some garbage stuff. So me being independent and even being able to make these kind of moves comes from my desire for space. And the desert offered me this space, and I just left at the chance to do it. It's a lot harder than it sounds, of course. I mean, I feel like you were going to ask me about challenges or something, but it hasn't totally been like a smooth transition here.
Well, you're psychic, because I saw in another interview you did with someone, you said, I've been challenged here the way early homestead women in the area were, who lived alone. Talk about some of those challenges.
Well, I was married when I moved out here, and so that wasn't part of the plan. Part of the plan wasn't to be divorced at so young an age and alone here. So, but since it was my idea to come here, I decided to stay. And the record label that I did the movie with folded and didn't honor my contract. So that was all of a sudden I really was literally starting over with $0, because I spent my savings on this and my savings on the film. So yes, I have running water and electricity, things that June Limerick Paxton didn't have, but I had to kind of adapt, and in that process, learn how to thrive. So I actually always paint this little cactus now that says adapt and thrive. And I started painting then at that time, because I was like, I can't make any movies, they're too expensive. I need to get jobs. I need to keep the house. So I started the Kidnap Yourself also as an art collective, and started inviting artists in that would stay for like a month to 3 months and share the workspace. And so the other intention of being here was to have this conduit of creativity you know, not just me to make a movie, but my husband to sculpt, and friends to come here and feel free to like make things. So I've always kind of made sure this house as a space for anyone who comes to see me has that ability. But yeah, the desert, I'm a prickly pear now because I bloom in the spring and I have these little sharp edges, keep me alive. I had to learn how to adapt. And I think the desert has taught me more than anything that life is hard, of course. But if you learn how to land on your feet, you can do it again. So I've been a chef out here. I haven't just been a film professor, I've been a chef. I've catered weddings, you know, I mean, I've done like whatever it takes, you know, I mean, within reason.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah, I'm selling pastries.
Yeah, it suddenly brought to mind like the creatures who live here adapt to seasons when there's plentiful water and when there's not. And as humans, we kind of adapt, because I had a similar experience when I moved here, losing a huge client that I had that essentially allowed me to pick up my life in Los Angeles and move here. And it's like you get stripped of things that make you feel comfortable, and suddenly you're not anymore. And you have to figure out how to get comfortable again.
Right. Oh yeah, and all my first friends were musicians who toured half the year. So I also had to be like, oh, I gotta make friends. Like
How
friends.
did you do that?
I gotta, like, join the arts council, or you know, I had to like force myself to connect, I guess, a bunch of times too. But and there weren't a lot of people at that time, I feel like, in my age group. So that was the other thing. All my first friends, I think, were like men in their early 50s. Some reason, all very good brothers to me. I feel like in my divorce, I cried the most over the records being split up. So they were like, "It's just stuff. It's just stuff, Kate." So I had good brother vibes my first couple of years. But yeah, I had to remember to make friends. And Philly, you walk to the bar, or you can walk down the street. And I love driving, actually, and I love driving places, but I won't if I don't have to, probably. So I do have to force myself here to remember to connect. So being isolated is intentional because I get a lot of work done, but it's also like I have to remember to open up the house and invite an artist in, and have someone here in August. And
yeah. So how does that work with the collective? Do people come to you and say, "Hey, I'd like to come out and work," or do you have like a formal process that you put out at certain times of the year to say, "I'm opening up my space, send in an application," or is it that formal, or is it pretty laid back?
It's always just through a friend, and a couple of them have been my former students, and they're my favorite ones, really. They've been kind of the most productive, which is cool. Yeah, there's no formal thing. And with the pandemic, but originally it was out of necessity too, to like cover repairs or pay for the new swamp pool, or if they would contribute a donation to the house or whatever. This will be the year maybe I start doing it again, but it's always through friends, I guess. Can we talk about the Homesteader Ladies again?
Oh, yes, please.
Starting over with no money means also not making films. And my first paintings here were just on like scraps of wood with like leftover house paint. And I started writing because I actually love telling this to students, even if they're film students, but you never should feel like you don't have the tools that you need if you have a pen. It's just the most important thing, like, you can always have. One of the most beautiful tools in the world. So that's when I started documenting the weather. And I was making just like a little sketchbook, like comic book about the desert weather. And I'm a nerd. I'm okay with being a camera person, a nerd, and all these things, but I really love the weather. And it's an emotional barometer. There's so many things that affects us. It all ties into us being connected to the stars, to me, like all of it, the atmosphere of what we're made of in the earth is all connected. So I love writing down observations. So they're all really short little diaries. And I just started making them like they're out of print now, but I just started printing like my whole sketchbooks. But when I made my first one, I didn't know that there were these other female writers in the area. And I stumbled upon June Lamert Paxton, who wrote a book called My Life on the Mojave. And she apparently was also often the poet laureate of 29 Palms and would read poems during Easter at the Oasis of Mara. And she became kind of also a local historian because she wrote letters home. Like she left her family in Pasadena to live out here for her health. And so they would make regular trips, but she did live alone and had to make friends with neighbors and kind of learn a different kind of reliability. And I think that's what I'm saying when I felt like a homesteader, like, okay, I have to make this work without a family support system and make friends, have neighbors and things we take for granted maybe in the city. But she is a beautiful writer and she wrote poems and letters home. So that my life on the Mojave book is like her letters and stuff. I realized that her observations were as important as my own, that I could be a modern voice contributing to the next history of the space. And I think female voices are so important. And she's so cute too. You have to Google her picture. She's like, oh my gosh.
Yes.
And so I always find like newspaper articles and stuff because she wrote for 30 years about living here. So accidentally, I feel like I'm honoring her whenever I speak about my weather diaries. I can't without bringing her up.
Totally.
But when I started, I didn't realize I was in a lineage of personal yet historic voices. So my weather diaries now are kind of an accidental almanac, like Ben Franklin or Richard. Here I am. And you can look back and I can be like, yeah, there's a cold spell at the end of May every year. And people complain. And then June 1st comes and it's 90 degrees. And then they complain. Well, and I love being like at the swap meet and someone's like, it smells like snow. I'm like, yeah, it does. You know, just little things like that have made it really fun to write about living here. But it all came out of necessity for having no money to film and just being like, I have a pen. Mm-hmm. So my writing has grown here. All my art has grown here. Everything has grown. So I mean, I am the prickly pear, just blooming around. I'm adapting, you know.
Right. So you are filming now, or is it a film that you've already done that will be shown in the park very soon?
I started a film this winter about sunrises, and I just was having a pandemic moment. Actually, a neighbor said their cute guy moved up the street and he walked his dogs at 6:30 in the morning. So I got up with my camera to be like, I'll go see if he's cute. I know, I'm a dork, but he's cute. But while I was out there with my camera, I didn't see him actually for like 3 mornings. I went out and I reacquainted myself with the sunrise. And when I do time lapse, I am a little lazy. I probably mostly have done sunsets. I'd say 80% of my time lapse is later in the day. Let's just say I'm not a great morning person. I can rise to the occasion. And so while I was, it was like a dawn manhunt, I came up with this film idea. And with the pandemic and everything, I just thought it's a good time to make a film about new beginnings. And that each day is its own revelation. And I really love those ideas too, in terms of like existential dilemmas. Like it's also the relentless march of time. I know when you time lapse, you just sit there and think about all this stuff. But I work with natural light a lot. I loved the idea of making a movie that each shot starts in the dark and reveals a new thing. But I'm not really great at being up in the morning, so it was like
another challenge.
Yeah. But I'm almost finished, and each sunrise is only 15 seconds long. So I made this other little formal kind of editing trick, and each one has its own unique soundtrack. So I've had musicians contributing like individual, original, short pieces, which has been so fun. And yeah, I'm always working with musicians in new ways, and this one's great. And the band Yawning Man, who is one of the local desert rock bands, one of the originals, I had the privilege of writing the liner notes for their last album last year, which they filmed out at Giant Rock. So I wrote about Giant Rock and the music, but they are playing a benefit for the Desert Institute. That's a part of the education program at the Joshua Tree National Park. And they asked if I would open up for the band with the film. So I'll tell a little desert story about the making of the film. I don't know if I'll leave in the part about manhunting or not. We'll see. It's already public knowledge. I'm doomed. Be cute. So on July 17th, but it's a very limited seating. I think there's only 80 tickets that'll be released, but they might be sold out by the time this is broadcast. But it's a really cool opportunity because there's a little amphitheater in the park that I didn't know about in Indian Cove. Did you know about that?
I did not until most recently. They started saying they were going to have a couple of concerts out there. So I had no idea. It's kind of like, it reminds me of living on the East Coast, and people who live there have never been to see the Statue of Liberty, the Empire State Building, or like when the Twin Towers was there, you'd ask people like, yeah, I've never been there. It's kind of like that stuff's right in your backyard and you just kind of take it for granted.
I only go to the park when I have friends in town, probably, which is a shame, but I live closer to Pioneer Town. So I've finally been exploring over there because it was really wrecked from the Sawtooth fire. And then I'm not gonna remember the name of the most recent fire, but the Sawtooth fire. I don't know if you were here then, but that was a nightmare.
No.
So the Pioneer Town Preserve is open again.
Oh,
so I've finally been exploring back there, and I'm like in love. I'm like, the desert just revealed another little jewel that I'm like,
Robin Maxwell, I interviewed a while back, and she's an author who lives up near Pipes Canyon, and she told the story of the water dropper coming. She and her husband were not aware of even what was happening, and all of a sudden this big whoosh comes on their roof. And then they realized what was happening and they had to leave. So if anybody hasn't heard the Robin Maxwell episode, she talks all about
cool. No, I want to check it out. Yeah,
totally.
Is that the Sawtooth one or the more recent one?
No, the Sawtooth. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's how I ended up. Yeah. I mean, even over here where I'm on the other side of Old Woman Springs, they were like, get ready to like evacuate. It was
scary.
That was the first for me being that close to a wildfire. I'm a little nervous about our upcoming drought as my weather diary. Like the fact that I didn't have to hula hoe weeds for like 3 months means we're going to have a really bad drought. Oh, right. I know that's terrible, but I'm like, normally my back is broken from pulling weeds, and that hasn't happened this year. So I'm nervous.
Right. Yeah, I've heard a couple of other people mention that as well. So yeah, it could be. I'm looking forward to hopefully some kind of monsoon situation.
Yes.
Which is always exciting. It's kind of like sitting on the beach on the East Coast and watching the storm come in off the
all
water.
of it.
Yeah.
I never met a thunderstorm I didn't like.
Yeah. So experimental animation, talk about that, and how did you become interested in that?
Well, experimental animation is hard to define, but I guess a quick definition could be that you can animate anything. So even puppets like A Nightmare Before Christmas fall under experimental animation. Like anyone who was doing puppet work went to that part of Cal Arts to study. So it does cover a lot of things in terms of whatever can be moving image that's not necessarily a character telling a story, but experimental animators do tell stories. So that's a tough one. I'm a photographer. That's what happened in high school. I was lucky enough to go to a school that had a dark room, and I was able to play. And every time I cut school, it was because I was taking pictures, Mom, so I'm not in trouble. And when I got to college at University of the Arts in Philly, they had like an experimental film program and an animation program, or classes, I guess. And I saw moving paintings for the first time. I saw films that had been done on the surface of film with paint and dyes and stamps and moth wings. Wow. Yeah. And I was like, beautiful, because it's like a moving painting, and all that based on how our eye perceives images moving 24 frames at a time. So all that nerd stuff is what kind of got me into the moving image. I've been working on 35 Clear Leader this year too. So I'm making like an abstract color film. I should just put a nerd alert at the head of this podcast. So experimental means a lot. It can mean a lot of things, but probably anything cool that you saw on a commercial was because they were experimenting. It led me into more deeper photography stuff. So I do a lot of camera tricks and light painting and time lapse, because it's single images. Making one movie is actually considered animation. So,
well, you animate marshmallows and beets and cactuses. Those are some of
but I don't animate them. I only
They look
Right.
animated to me as I was looking through your website. I was
Thank
like,
you.
look at those marshmallows.
So that is that's a weird split in my work. Like all of my paintings or character look like they should be animated,
Yeah.
but my films are these dark landscape moody things. So they're all connected somehow, but I would have to hire a team to like animate my paintings probably. But yeah, for some reason it's all connected, but a little bit different. Yeah. Thanks
So
for
do you feel like
noticing.
your art changed at all when you moved to the desert? I mean, you said when you moved, you started doing more writing out of necessity, but do you feel that you experienced a shift in either your inspiration or the actual work that you were doing? Like not so much of this, but more of this, or?
I think what really changed the most in the desert was that I got to really be immersed in landscape stuff for the first time. And when I even started that film for Brant, he made me a map. Like it's not like he ran around the desert where I filmed everything. Like I was on my own, or I made friends with guys in the low desert with like off-road vehicles to take me to old spots where they had generator parties. Like I better go in a car where I won't get stuck. And but immersing myself in the landscape is kind of what became really important here in terms of like my film work. And now I've done a few films out here that are landscape, or not out here, but since I was out here that are landscape based work. So I really developed that part of my film language here, which I might not have done the same way in the city. And I think it's really interesting that even I, growing up, thought the desert was an empty space. The idea that it's some sort of wasteland, all those cliches that are just like really, the people think are based on observation. And I'm like, but you have to spend time there to realize how alive it is. The desert is the furthest thing from being a wasteland. So I love the way it grasps the imagination that way. And I had to shoot with natural light here all the time to save money, you know, plus I don't have a studio with lights. So I've also became, I think, a better cinematographer because I've had to adapt to that kind of stuff. But that's been kind of cool. I didn't have that confidence when I was younger. So
And I think the light here is just, it's like nothing I've ever seen.
mm-hmm.
And the way it plays on the mountains, you know, when the sun's going down or when we have clouds and how that light play happens, it's really, really beautiful.
That was the fun thing about trying to get up for a sunrise, because I have to like try to plan a little bit of clouds because they never do the same thing twice when you're doing time lapse. And I'd be up 4:30, like, does it say clouds, or you know, and go back to sleep, or just be like, this is the only day I can go. It doesn't matter if there's clouds. So I pay attention to those cloud things. I think I've never met a cloud I didn't like.
Most days when they're in the sky, they're super interesting. Like we've had some really cool stuff happening over the last couple of weeks where we've had puffy clouds, and then that one day they were just all very wispy, you know, or then it turns sunset and they look like cotton candy because there are just that look of cotton candy. It's just amazing to me. And I love those two parts of the day. Just feel like when everyone who lives here is communing, because you can go on Instagram or Facebook and everybody's posting from where their vantage point is of what's going on, but we're all taking it in, and that to me is super cool.
Yeah, and I just love that about the weather in general, is that we're all affected by it. But yeah, I know exactly. That's when you go on a liking spree because you're like. I feel like I also learned that in the desert too. Like if someone invites you to a new place, you should say yes, because you're never going to see that perspective again. Like, or not that you won't see it again, but their perspective is never going to be the same as your, and everyone has a pretty amazing perspective. So that was like another rule of thumb. Because I'll isolate. So I have to go like, it's a new place. You have to go show up. And I don't know.
It's funny how we make these little rules for ourselves. When I moved here, because I didn't know anybody at all, I would go out to places by myself, but I would made a rule that if I saw somebody at least 3 times, I would go and introduce myself on that 3rd time. And that would kind of be my in, like, you know, I've been at a couple places. This, I think, is the 3rd time I've seen you. I just want to introduce myself. So I think we all develop our shtick, if you will, of how we kind of insert ourselves to start to know people in the community too.
Yeah, I do love it here so much. I can't imagine being anywhere else. I always joke around like I'm Milky Way adjacent. I'm like, I can't leave that. Like, no, or I would have
real estate listing.
Yeah, if I ever put my house up, I'll be like, kidnap yourself headquarters is Milky Way adjacent.
I love it. That's rad. Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on and talking with me today. I really appreciate it. But before I let you go, I'm going to pull out that magic jar of random questions and select 4 for you. If you're listening and you're not familiar with this portion of the podcast, this is where I pull 4 random questions out of the jar, and Kate will answer those questions on the Diary Unlocked portion of the podcast, which is available exclusively to Patreon supporters of Desert Lady Diaries. So if you want to be a Patreon supporter of Desert Lady Diaries, go to desertladydiaries.com, click on the support page, and sign up to be a patron of the podcast. So the questions that I have for Kate are, what was the first music you ever bought? What was the first paying job you ever had, and where was it? Tell me about someone you admire and why. And the last one will be, if you didn't live in the desert, where would you be living? So if you want to hear Kate's answers, go to desertladydiaries.com, sign up to be a patron of the podcast, and you'll have access to Kate's answers to her questions and all of the other Diary Unlocked episodes that are out there since I think the beginning of 2018 or so is when I started doing it. So thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate it. And I'm excited. I'm going to be on the lookout to see when they start putting the tickets up for your film. Hopefully, maybe some folks will still be able to get in when they hear this podcast.
Yeah, they might release a few like right before that week. Yeah.
Thanks
awesome.
so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
If you know someone who would like this episode, I hope you'll share it with them today. Thanks so much for listening.